Hey, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Shavuos Daf Vav. We're going to be continuing the sugya that we started yesterday. And the sugya we started yesterday was a machlokas tanoim around the following subject. Let's say that a person has tsaras, and the tsaras has two shades of white. So we learned yesterday that there are four different colors, and that's the piece of paper in front of you. There's baheres, which is the brightest, Sid, Se'es, and Krumbetza. And on the left, you can see the order of brightness. So really the order of brightness is Baheres and Se'es. Those are the two avos. And then Tolda, the Sid is a Tolda of Baheres, and Krumbetza is a Tolda of Se'es. So this order is list in brightness is 1, 3, 2, 4. But on the right side, it's Av Tolda, Baheres, and Sid, followed by Se'es and Krumbetza. Now, Rabbi Akiva seems to hold that you can only be mitzaref two things when they're next to each other in brightness. So one can partner with two, two can partner with three, three can partner with four. Four can't partner with two, three can't partner with one because they're too far apart, and obviously one can't partner with four. So we're going to be continuing to discuss that tonight. And that's where we're starting from on Daf Vav, Amud Aleph, about 6 lines down. How do we know that Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that we only allow for tseruf to get to the shiur of a nega when the colors are 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and that had it been that the color shadings was 1 to 3, let's say in our example, Baheres and Sid. So let's say I have a nega that's of shiur, 50% of it is the color of Baheres, 50% is the color of Sid, there Rabbi Akiva would say, no dice. That's not considered to be a nega. Why? Because the only time we allow tseruf is when they're next to each other. Where is that mari makom, says the Gemara. Ilema, if you want to say mehadetanya from the following brisa, we'll see that that won't work. What is this brisa? Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Shal Yehoshua beno shel Rabbi Akiva. Me Rabbi Akiva. This is a nice historical note. Rabbi Akiva's son's name was Yehoshua. For those of you who have that name, beautiful name, we always thought Yehoshua ben Nun was the only one. We have one and a little bit more. Yeshua ben Korcha, very good. Yeshua ben Korcha, very good. But that's not Yedias Klalias. People don't know that that's Rabbi Akiva. And one of the reasons that they called him that is because he was apparently bald or was balding or something like that. Receding hairline in his 40s. He just got frum, married a nice girl. Hairline's gone, So that was Yeshua ben Korcha in the Gemara. That's taka true, but most people, that's not. I don't think most people know that. I just think you know that. So says the Gemara, Shal Yoshua ben, what did he say to his father? May Rabbi Akiva, Mipnei ma amru maros negoyim shnayin sheim arba. Why is it, says Yehoshua to his father, Rabbi Akiva, that the Mishnah at the open of our Masechta says that Shavuos that maros negoyim are shnayin sheim arba? So Amar Lo, the father says to his son, Rabbi Akiva says, V'im lav ma yomru. What else would you have wanted them to say? Right? So it says the Gemara that Yehoshua responds to his father, Yomru mikrum beitza l'ma'al latame. Look at your sheet, that as long as the color is brighter than krum beitza, you're done. You're tame, right? Because krum beitza is the least bright color that qualifies as a nega. It's color brightness level 4. So that means that anything that's 4 or brighter. So Yehoshua is saying, I don't understand the need to articulate Baheres, Sid, Se'es. Why do we have to say Krumbetza? Why all of them? Just say anything brighter than Krumbetza is going to be problematic. Amar Lo, Rabbi Akiva says, oh, now I understand your question. Lomar shemitzdarfim zeimzeh. This comes to teach us that by virtue of the fact that they're labeled, that there are times that we're able to be mitzaref, that if we have a nega that's half of one shade of white and another half of the nega that's another shade of white, then they're mitzaref. Amar Lo, the Yomru mikrum beitzo lemala tameu mitzarfim zeimzeh. So just synthesize, all right, let's keep it as lean as possible. Yehoshua wants to know from his father Rabbi Akiva, then just say anything that's brighter than white and all shades above it are mitzaref to one another. So says the Gemara, Amar Lo, Rabbi Akiva says to his son Yehoshua, a third of the way down on Vav Amar Aleph, Lomar Loch, this comes to teach us a din. Kol Kohen, she'eno baki, bahen uvishmosehen, eno ruas hanagoyim. If you want to be good at doing the bedikos for maros nagaim as a Kohen, you need to be holding cup. You need to know the difference between Baheres and Sid, Sid and Se'es, Se'es and Krumbetza, and really that's not even in the right order. Let's read them in the right order. You need to know the difference between Baheres and Se'es, which are close to each other. You need to know the difference between Se'es and Sid 2 and 3. And you need to know the difference between Sid and Krum Beitza, because that is when they are closest. This is like checking for badikas now. There are some people, my father's red-green colorblind. You could never paskin maros. Even with all the shimush in the world, if you can't tell shades of red, you're done for. Shades of red is the difference between a nida d'oraisa and not. So we don't mess around. So I have good vision, and I had a minimal amount of training in yeshiva in Kollel. They dumped a whole bag of badikas. We had to like paskin on them. So if you're good at it, you can paskin even your own shilas at home. You're allowed to do that as long as you're a yasher person. But if by the din of the maros negayim, if you're a kohen and you can't tell the difference between these four, so what's Rabbi Akiva saying to his son? I need all four to be there because I need the kohanim to know that if you don't know this list of colors and how to distinguish, you can't paskin maros negayim. Okay, here is where the logic comes in, where we see that Rabbi Akiva might hold Zula Malam Mizu from our Mishnah that you can only be mitzdarif 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, but can't skip in between. What was the argument of Yehoshua? We should have said from Krum Beitza Ulamala. But what did he leave out? Krum Beitza is the tolda of Se'es. So it seems like his reference is Krum Beitza Ulamala. It's only talking about Se'es and Krum Beitza, the Av and the tolda. The ilu misid heichal ulamala lo ka'amar. But he didn't mention sid heichal. And that seems to imply that there's no distinction between those two at all. That we don't actually care about the others. We only care about shades of color. And midalo amar le, and because Yehoshua did not say that to his father, because he didn't say the tolda of Sid, Shema mino deshmi le Rabbi Akiva damar kula lebahade seis mitzdarfin. That really everything can be mitzdarif to seis. Why can everything be mitzdarif to seis? Because the pasuk says seis Vilaseis vilasapachas. Sapachas, as we'll soon see, means the second one. And that means that according, and this is not mashma from the Gemara with clarity, you need to be shown him for this. This is a harder sugya. According to this approach of Rabbi Akiva, everything partners with Se'es because Se'es is color number 2, so by definition it partners with color number 1. But according to Rabbi Akiva, Se'es is also the Av, and Sid and Krum Beitza are both toldos of Se'es. That's a chiddush, for we didn't have that yesterday. That both toldos are that of Se'es. He disagrees with what we learned yesterday, that the tolda of Sid is of Baheres, correct. He holds that Se'es is the Av, and Sid and Krum Beitza are both toldos of Se'es. So that's why Rabbi Akiva would say that everything can partner with Se'es. Baheres because it's close in color, and Sid and Krum Beitza because even though Se'es and Krum Beitza are 2 away, but because it's a tolda, we can still group them together. Says the Gemara, no. The Dilma Se'es v'toldasa, Baheres v'toldasa. Maybe what Yehoshua meant was, yes, he mentioned the case of Krum Beitza, but maybe he was just kind of like, Abba, you know the rest of my sentence. And also Sid and Baheres. So maybe that's the case. And therefore, we don't have a raya for a Mari Makom that Rabbi Akiva holds Zula Malamizu. We tried, and so far we don't have a good source. So let's try again. Ella, halfway down, Midi Reb Chanina. Dama Reb Chanina, Mashal Rabbi Akiva Lamad Davar Domem. According to Rabbi Akiva, what is his approach to these 4 colors of Baheres, Sid, Se'es, and Krum Beitza? Le'arba kosos shel chalav. 4 cups of milk, the whitest of liquids that we have, at least normal liquids that we have. Echad, in one of the cups, naflu l'sochan shtei tipin shel dam. So let's say you have 6 ounces, and there are 2 droplets of blood that fall in there. That's still going to be very, very white. It's a shade, a hair darker than the pure milk. The 2 droplets won't change it tremendously. The next cup, 6 ounces of milk, gets 4 droplets of sheldam. The next cup got 8. All of them still look white. So here we see an express version of Rabbi Akiva. We have our cups in a row. We have 4 cups of milk. I pour 6 ounces in each one. 2 droplets of blood in the first cup, 4 in the second, 6 or 8, whatever the numbers are, in a cascading fashion. The first cup is the most white. The second cup is the second one. If that's the mashal of Rabbi Akiva, that means he holds Zulam al Mizul. Have you ever watched him make paint at Home Depot? They put it in the machine, they crack off the top, they punch in a code, there's a white base, and they drop in droplets, black, whatever their coating is, black and red and orange, whatever the colors are, until they nail your color, down to the shade, down to the shade. What's not mentioned in the Gemara is what about the shades of colors between, let's say, Baheres and Seis? We have no idea how that works. Would those in-betweens be mitzdaref to Sid, which is number 3? That we don't know. We're much more nuanced than that in our color schemes, because if you ever walk through the paint aisle of any store that sells paint, there are tens of thousands of shades of every color. I think I read somewhere that the human eye can distinguish between 16 million shades of color. I don't know if it's true, but I could hear it. I hear the Havamina. How many blues are there? What color is this? Is it a gray? A little bit of blue in it. There's still some white going on. So there's so many shades. And people who are really colorblind, like really hardcore colorblind, they only see the world in shade. They see no color, but it's grayscale, the whole thing. It says the Gemara, therefore we have our proof that Rabbi Akiva holds Zulam al Mizu. The Gemara pushes back. Amor the Shama said the Rabbi Akiva. When is it that Rabbi Akiva holds of Zulam al Mizu b'pasuch? This is only true b'pasuch, which is basically Rashi, 4 or 5 lines from the bottom. Me'urav hu nega lavan adam dam. We're talking about a white nega with a little bit of red. So maybe that's where he says, is Zulam al Mizu. But b'chaluk, in a pure shade of white, perhaps Misham Aslei, would he really say Zulam al Mizu? Perhaps he'd agree with the other Rishonim that it's just an Av and Tolda, and that's it. And we're not Mitzaref of anything else. It says the Gemara, B'chitema ki hechi de Sham Aslei b'pasuk hacha Sham Aslei b'chaluk. And if you want to say that the rules of Rabbi Akiva are the same, that just like when it's mixed, white with a little bit of blood, we say that it's Zulam al Mizu, that he holds that 1 is to 2, 2 is to 3, 3 is to 4, but not 1 is to 3 or 2 is to 4. If that's how he holds, then perhaps our comparison's off for another reason. Maybe even in a mixture, he would not say Zulam al Mizu. Where do we get this from? V'hatanya, look who's talking. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Adam dam shebazeh v'shebazeh kiyayin hamazug b'mayim. This red with a couple of dots, they're like wine that is diluted with water. Ella. Shel baheres oza kisheleg v'shel sid deha hemena. Let's follow our chart here. Look at the flow that he says. He said that baheres is bright like snow. Baheres by us is number 1. And look what he skips to. V'shel sid deha hemena. Sid, which is the tolda, but the third brightest, so it's 1 to 3 deha hemena. What does that show us about Rabbi Akiva? He doesn't hold of Zulam al Mizu because he allowed 1 and 3 to be mitzdaref. He said in this brisa that Sid is the number 2 to Baheres, which isn't correct. So asks the Gemara at the very top of the next page, and we'll be going to the 2 dots toward the bottom of Daf Vav Beis. V'im Isa, if he holds Zulam al Mizu, then what he should have said is not Sid. He should have said Se'es, or its equivalent, is Shel Tzemer Diha Hemen Miboile. He said the wrong thing. If what Rabbi Akiva was trying to prove in the Bryce at the bottom of the page is Zulam al Mizu, when things are pasuch, when things are mixed, fine, but then make sense, please. Why did you say Baheres is Azak Hasheleg, and then you skip to number 3, which is Sid? If you're saying that you hold Zulam al Mizu, then it should have been Baheres Azak Hasheleg, and then it should have been Shel Tzemer, which is Seis, as we saw yesterday. So therefore, the Gemara says, Amarle, Achanami, you're 100% right, in Achanami. There is something else going on here. Tanya, let's learn in the following brisa. Reb Nasan Omer, Lo shama Rabbi Akiva shel sid de'ayimenu, ela shel tzemer de'ayimenu. You're correct. We're going to change the text of the previous brisa based on another brisa. And therefore, clear, black on white, Rabbi Akiva certainly holds of Zulam al Mizu, because when we correct the Mishnah, we started out by saying that Baheres is Ozak HaSheleg, and not Sid, but rather it's Tzemer, which is the equivalent of Se'es, which means it's step 1 to 2, which means we're Mitzaref 1 to 2, we're not Mitzaref 1 to 3, and therefore we have a brisa that indicates of Zulam al Mizu, according to Rabbi Akiva, and that answers our question as to where his source comes from. Okay, good. We're on Vav Amud Beis, about 4 lines down. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nehiyeh bidbaro. Says the Gemara, Uminala. What? I was waiting for what? Yeah. Oh. That was a test. Oh my gosh. We passed. If this chevra, it doesn't answer amen to a bracha. You guys are so from. Just Dan. Asks the Gemara, Uminalan de Baheres Azahi. How do we know that Baheres is the brightest? Yes, the brisa yesterday that we learned about this indicated that that Azah is the brightest, that Baheres, is the brightest, but how do we know? So says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Amar Kra, V'im Baheres Levanahi, Hi Levana, Ve'ena Cheres Levana. Baheres is what we call white. We'll call it pure white for our purposes. And it is the whitest of the white. We're so spitz, like you can go to the store and buy brightness of laser paper in different levels of brightness. Like we have no idea what the basics mean anymore. We live such a luxurious lifestyle. My son came home from yeshiva. He's like, I borrowed my Rebbe's car. And he's like, I never realized how luxurious your car was until I drove his jalopy. He said the bumper pashut is leaving sparks flying behind. It's dragging on the ground. He said, I went 0 to 40 in 8 seconds. He's like flooring it slow. We live such luxurious life. We don't even understand it's unbelievable. So they're talking, salt of the earth. That's how they live. Simple. So it's the whitest of the white is Baheres. That's what they knew. Tanu Rabbanan, Baheres Amuka. Baheres also has an appearance of being deeper in the skin when you have that kind of lesion. If you have a beam of light, but everything around it is shaded and shadowed, so that looks like it's a deeper hole just by appearance. It's an optical illusion, but it does look that way. Se'es, ein se'es ela gavoa. When one has se'es, which is the second brightest, so that is a raised appearance. V'chein hu omer al kol heharim haramim ve'al kol hagevaos hanesaos. So nesaos and se'es, same words. So I have a question that I don't know the answer to. If a person has a lesion that's half Baheres and half se'es, they're mitzaref. But does that mean that one is raised and one is low? Because it seems that se'es is raised and it seems that Baheres is low. I don't know, but it's what it seems like from the Gemara. The pasuk says sapachas, ein sapachas elo tfela. The word sapachas means secondary or tafel too. V'cheinu omer v'omer sivchenina. So says the Gemara, good. Ashkechan tfela l'se'es. I know the pasuk says l'se'es v'lasapachas. What's the sapachas of se'es? That's krumbetza. That's, as we see on our sheet, that krumbetza is a tolda to the av of se'es. And if the sapachas means secondary or tafel to, that means that which is secondary to se'es we know based on the pasuk. What is that? That is krumbetza. But tfela lebaheres minayin mehecha teisi that baheres has a tolda at all. On our sheet it says that way. The brisa yesterday said that way. That's where I got this from. But the Gemara is saying, how does the brisa know that the av of baheres has a tolda called sid? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Zera, Ne'amra levana b'se'es, v'ne'amra levana b'baheres. The word levana is a bridge, Gzeira Shava. And just like ma levana ha'amur b'se'es yesh lo tfela, that just like the word levana, which exists by the word se'es, the av of se'es, we know that there's a tfela, which is krumbetza. That's the last tolda, number 4. Af levana ha'amur b'baheres. So too, when the word levana appeared by baheres, that also indicates that yesh lo tfela, which is what we would call sid heichal, which is the limestone color, the lime coloring of the Beis HaMikdash. B'masni satana, we have a similar maramakom in a Mishnah that indicates the same thing. Hatel, hetil hakasuv lesapachas bein se'es lebaheres. That in between se'es and baheres, which is the two listed in the pasuk, there is one extra one. Lomar lach, kishem shetfela lese'es, kach tfela lebaheres. So 2 ways to learn, either by Gzeira Shava or by the Mishnah itself. That brings us to the Mishnah, to the 2 dots, about a little bit more than a third of the way down. And what we now know, we've answered a bunch of questions. We know why baheres is the brightest. We know why se'es, it means that it's raised. We know that sapachas means secondary. And that also taught us that both baheres and se'es both have toldos. No, skin tone is this is ignoring your skin tone. This is an override. So it's like we would call it a growth of some kind. What? Talking about white.
Okay, but white appears different on different color, on different backgrounds.
White is white. Just it may be confused by different backgrounds, but white is white. So there are optical illusions like this that if you look at a color with no background, it looks one way. With a background, it looks like another thing. So then you gotta find a way to block it. And I don't know. I don't know the mice of what they did. I'm not sure. But it's one of the reasons why we don't have ksamim if a woman is bleeding, not an internal check, but if there's, let's say, blood on an undergarment, if that undergarment is colored, she's tahora. By ksamim by colored garments we ignore because it's impossible to tell the shade when there's a. That's also it's also confounding the color. That's different than our case over here. But no, I didn't see anything like that in our Gemara. No. The Gemara asks, Se'es ketzemer lavan, my tzemer lavan. What do you mean by white wool? Let's remember that Se'es is one shade darker than Baheres, which is like sheleg, which is like snow. Says the Gemara, Amar Abibi, Amar Avasi, tzemer naki ben yomo, she mechavnen bo lemelas. It's like a new sheep where the wool is perfectly white, and mechavnen bo, they cover it lemelas to keep it perfectly clean. They keep it so that they can give it as a donation, whatever they plan on doing with it. It's absolutely a perfectly white coat of fur. Amar Chanina, mashal de rabbanan lemal davar dome. The Rabbanan, we're going back a little bit. The Rabbanan, who are of the opinion that it's 1324, as we have it over here, that you can only be mitzaref, that which is under its own av. So you can be mitzaref baheres and sid, and you can be mitzaref se'es and krumbetza. Where do they get that from? What's the mashal, I should say? Says the Gemara, L'trei malche, l'trei ifriche. Two kings and their two whatever the level is under their king, their two viceroys. So there, it's one king and his viceroy, and another king and his viceroy, 1-3, and then 2-4, very similar. Malcho shel zeh lemala mi malcho shel zeh. King number one is higher than king number two. V'ifruchu shel zeh lemala v'ifruchu shel zu. High shel zeh. So there we see the Gemara is saying 1, 3, 2, 4 is basically the count that we allow for the Av and the Tolda. So the king and his viceroy are a group, and the next king and his viceroy are a group. And it comes out like the number system that we have here of 1, 3, 2, 4. Says the Gemara, no. Hi, that's not true. It could very well be that it's not king, viceroy, but it's king, viceroy, viceroy. In which case it's 1, 2, 3, 4. In our list, it would be Baheres Se'es, Sid Krumbetza. It would reshape the order, so which means that the Rabbanan who don't hold of Zulam Alamizu, it looks like from the mashal that it could be Zulam Alamizu. The Gemara says you're right. This king is greater than his own viceroy. And the next king is greater than my viceroy, which is actually 1, 3, 2, 4. It's just a clarification of the mashal to say that me and my viceroy are one, you and your viceroy are one pair. So we can be mitzdaref, and you can be mitzdaref. That's the mashal. What's the nimshal? That if there's a nega that is baheres and sid, they're mitzdaref, av and tolda, and if there's one that is se'es and krumbetza, that they're also mitzdaref. Rav Bar Ava gives another mashal, Amar kigon malcha ve al kapta rofila v'reish galusa. He says it's actually quite similar to a king, and then a number 2, and then a number 3, and then a number 4. Says the Gemara, what do you mean 1, 2, 3, 4? If that's true, that's literally Rabbi Akiva. So how can the Rabbanan have this as a mashal? This is a terrible mashal if you're trying to prove a point. Says the Gemara, like we corrected before, it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1, 3, 2, 4. How so? Elakigon malcha v'rofila, the king and his underling, the al kafta v'reish galusa, and this quasi king and his even lower statured viceroy. 1, 3, 2, 4. Rava Amar kigon shvur malka v'kesar. He says it's like the Persian king shvur, or the kesar, the Caesar. So we have a Persian king and we have the Caesar. So says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Papa Rava, Haiminahu Adif. Who's greater, Shvur Malka or the Kesar? Amar le bechur she'ka'achile. Are you eating in a forest? Namely, do you live under a rock? You don't know the answer to the obvious questions. Of course, we don't know the context, but they did. Pokhazi tiva deman sagi be'alma. Go see the nature of what this person's like out in the world. Tichsiva tochal kol ara v'atidoshna v'atidakna. Of course, they're going to be consuming the whole world. Rabbi Yochanan zu Romi chayeves. This is the guilty party of Rome. Shetiva yatsa b'chol olam. That they are all over the world. Ochol olam kulo. So it's very clear which one is which. That the Romans are much worse, but which is the Caesars. But he didn't want to. He was a political player of Papa. He had relationships with the government. Like right now, like in Eretz Yisrael, you have like the chief rabbi is not purely a halachic rabbinic role. It's also a political role. You got to play a role in government, and it's not so pasha. Our greats, as we would refer to them, our gedolim, they're Torah, kol Torah kula all the time. They don't. I mean, they say things toward government. During COVID, they used to ask Reb Chaim Kanievsky questions, and he would say, "We're keeping the Chadarim," or whatever the psak was. But by and large, he was just Yoshev Olam. That was all he did. And then lastly for today, Ravina Amar Kigon Glima de Amar Vishachke, going back to color comparisons. It's like the coat of a sheep and a coat of the sheep that's warm out, Vishachke, when it's kind of rubbed out. And Sedina de Kisna, a material like a sheet that's made out of kisna, made out of flax, which is one color, vishachke, and then the worn out color of that as well, 1, 3, 2, 4, same exact thing as before. All of this explains the shita of the Rabbanan, that we can only be mitzdaref shiurim of that which is the same Avin told us said. So let's just review so that we have a very clean conclusion, because this Gemara is complicated, or was very complicated for me at least. So basically, the way it works is there's a machlokes tanoim in regards to how we are able to be mitzdaref different color negoim. According to Rabbi Akiva, when you look at the brightness levels, you can only do a tseruf if the brightness levels are next to one another. So you can be mitzdaref a half of a nega of baheres with a half of a nega of se'es, and you can do se'es and seed, and you can do seed and krumbetza, but you can't do anything that isn't next to one another. That's Rabbi Akiva. Masha'en Kain, according to the Chachamim, we look at the Av and the Tolda. That means Av and Tolda, Baheres and Sid are mitzdaref, and Se'es and Krumbetz are mitzdaref. But seemingly, nothing else is mitzdaref. We'll stop right here at the 2 dots of Es Sheyesh Ba Yediyah B'tchila, getting back into Tuma Sigas, and Amir Tashem will pick up with that tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.